First off, I need to clarify something. I am not the original Traveler, although I have adopted his alias to write my account. For those of you who do not know, my predecessor was an unlikely hero, the sole survivor of a botched experiment that went horribly wrong. He risked all to tell his story, whistleblowing on his government employers and their wealthy backers who have achieved the unthinkable, opening portals to parallel universes. Thanks to this man, we now know the truth about the elite's plan to either escape to another world or ravage those other worlds for resources. And even more seriously, he revealed the terrible realities and some of the dangerous civilizations or creatures that now rule over these alternate Earths. Cruel, warlike, and merciless empires who pose a clear and present danger to our own world, if and when they develop their own TDP technology. If you haven't listened to the Traveler's accounts yet, I suggest you do so before listening to mine any further. Many of you will be wondering what happened to the original Traveler, given the sudden end to his accounts. Well, I'm sorry. I am truly sorry to confirm that the US government finally caught up with him somewhere in Eastern Europe. Our hero disappeared off the grid, and so we can only assume he's either dead or imprisoned in some hellhole black site prison. Which honestly is probably even worse. And so sadly, Traveler is no more. But his legacy lives on. This is where I come in. You see, I too worked for this top secret project, albeit at a much lower level and security clearance. While my predecessor was down in the guts of the huge underground complex, operating as part of the survey teams deployed through the transdimensional portal, I was topside, working as a lowly intern in the accounts department. In fact, my clearance was so low that I had no idea the project existed, nor did I know the true purpose of the sprawling complex. Officially, I was a low-level government employee in a tedious federal job. This is what I was told when I accepted the position. But of course, I'm not totally stupid, so I knew there was more to it. After all, my office was located inside a heavily guarded military complex, and we knew there were underground levels where access was restricted. What's more, the complex is located in a very remote part of this country, 1,000 miles from my hometown. Still, my employment prospects were slim after college, and as dull as this entry-level position was, the pay and conditions were decent, and I was told there were prospects for promotion. So, that's how it began for me. And I suppose this is where my story would have ended, had it not been for the bizarre and unprecedented events of one fateful night. I was in the office late, working alone to meet a tight deadline. My boss at the time was a real ballbuster, and so I'd already gotten used to working unpaid overtime. Frustrating, but nothing out of the ordinary. I was sitting at my desk, staring at the spreadsheet on my computer screen whilst struggling to stay focused. I remember diligently typing away on my keyboard when suddenly the power cut out, plunging the windowless office into darkness. The event was disconcerting, but didn't cause me any undue concern. Not at first, anyway. Surges and temporary blackouts were actually pretty common in our offices, and this was the third I'd seen in only 2 weeks of working there. We'd been told to frequently save and back up our work for this very reason. My laptop was on battery power, and so my screen remained illuminated, and I sat tight and waited for the emergency lighting to kick in. But it didn't. Minutes passed and still nothing, and that's when I started to get worried. Us lowly employees had never received an adequate explanation for these disruptions to the electricity supply. We'd merely been told that power was being diverted downstairs. Of course, this only added to the rumor mill and gossip around the water coolers. It was rather exciting to speculate with my work colleagues during the daylight hours, but it was a different prospect when I was stuck here alone, after hours, and in darkness. I began feeling increasingly anxious as the lights stayed off, and then the ground started to shake beneath my feet. This was a new one, and not something I was prepared for. Was it an earthquake? They weren't common in this part of the country, and I couldn't help but feel there was a connection to the power outage moments before. I struggled to stand as the floor moved beneath my feet, and I stumbled as my laptop fell from the desk, the screen smashing when it hit the ground. Now the room was shrouded in total darkness, until suddenly it wasn't. In an instant, I was blinded by a burst of intense light, so bright that I had to cover my eyes. Then I got hit by a fierce wave of heat, like an unbelievable surge of energy had suddenly popped into existence right in the middle of my little office. At first, I feared some kind of flash fire, but the reality was far more terrifying. When I reopened my eyes and regained my composure, I witnessed something which made no logical sense. The wall at the back of the room had opened to reveal, well, what I could see was a room almost identical to the one I was in, except in this version the lights were still on. The plaster wall that should have been there had inexplicably disappeared, but the path through to the other side wasn't exactly clear. The passageway looked to me like a fluid membrane, a crystal clear wall which stood between me and whatever was on the other side. Was this a dream? Had I fallen and hit my head during the blackout? Perhaps, but it seemed so real. I walked forward, slowly but cautiously, intending to reach out and touch the membrane. Looking back, this was a crazy move, but in that moment it made sense in my confused brain. But to my surprise and horror, I tripped over some object I missed in the darkness, helplessly falling forward, right into the fluid wall in front of me. All of the air was sucked from my lungs as I became immersed in it, and there was nothing but black. I awoke sometime later, my head throbbing and retinas burning. It took me a moment to regain my wits and lift myself up. I discovered I was inside an office nearly, but not quite, identical to the one I'd just left. The power was on, and everything looked in order, but my smashed laptop was nowhere to be found. I shook my head in disarray, trying to make sense of all that had happened. The most logical conclusion was that I'd burnt out. I'd been working long hours after all, so perhaps I had hallucinated the whole experience. Either that or I'd suffered a panic attack and passed out. In any case, I just wanted to get out of there. I needed rest, and so decided I would deal with this shit in the morning. With some difficulty, I struggled to the door and walked out into the corridor, stumbling along underneath the glaring LED lights. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Clearly, I wasn't in Kansas anymore, and surely I should have realized something was wrong. But remember, at this point I had no idea what really went on within the facility, and couldn't have imagined what I'd just been through. And the office complex did appear much of the same as I would have expected. There were a couple of details different from how I remembered, the odd thing like a water cooler or desk out of place, but I wrote off these discrepancies, telling myself I was just tired and my mind was playing tricks on me. Soon, I reached the security checkpoint in front of the exit. I didn't recognize the armed guard sitting behind the desk, a burly and disinterested middle-aged man who didn't bother looking up from his phone when I walked by. I approached the sealed door and swiped the security card I carried in a lanyard around my neck. It didn't work. The door didn't swing open, but instead there was a bleep, followed by a red light. I tried again, 4 or 5 times, but the result was always the same. Frustrated, I turned back to the desk and sought to gain the attention of the bored guard. "Excuse me, sir," I interjected. My card isn't working?" He looked up in annoyance, rolling his eyes as he slammed down his phone and loudly typed into his keyboard. "Name?" he demanded abruptly. I told him, and he aggressively typed the details into his computer, frowning in annoyance when he didn't get the information he wanted. He looked up at me for the first time, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. "Are you new?" he demanded. I've worked here for like 2 weeks, I answered in confusion. The guard shook his head in annoyance. "Damn, this system. Those morons in IT can't sort out the glitches." He slammed his fist on a button located under his desk, and the door automatically swung open. "Go ahead," he ordered. "Thanks, man," I replied meekly before walking out. I eagerly embraced the cool but fresh air when I stepped outside. To my surprise, I saw it was now dawn, with the sun rising on the far horizon. How could this be possible? I couldn't account for the lost time. I didn't want to think about it, however. All I wanted was to get to bed and put my head down. I didn't have accommodation or even a parking space on site, but our employers provided a free shuttle service into the nearby town where I was staying. I boarded the bus, saying good morning to a surly driver who barely acknowledged my presence. I was the only passenger. During the journey, I looked at my phone and discovered I had no signal. Great, I thought. This day was going from bad to worse. Although, of course, I still had no idea what lay ahead. We arrived in the town, and I disembarked, strolling along Main Street as the morning sun shone down upon me. Readers of the original traveler's accounts may recall his description of this small settlement located about 10 miles from the facility. It's a 2-bit little town which could be described as anywhere USA. This wasn't somewhere I would have moved to if it hadn't been for the employment opportunity. I was new to town, so hadn't found a place to rent yet. So for the time being, I was staying at a local motel. A basic but clean and comfortable place, a couple of minutes walk from the bus stop. I felt myself flagging as I walked through the parking lot towards my room, fumbling in my pocket for my key and inserting it in the lock. But to my surprise and annoyance, the door didn't open. I saw it was jammed by the latch, which could only be locked from the inside. I noted an unpleasant stench emanating from within, something similar to rotting meat. I looked through the gap into the darkened room, only to be met by a face on the other side. A woman, her eyes bloodshot and skin pale white. I swore I could see dried blood on her chin. Clearly, she wasn't pleased to see me as she snarled and exposed her sharpened teeth. "What the fuck do you want?" she growled, squinting to see me in the morning sun. This is my room," I replied in confusion. "To hell it is," she shot back. "Now get the fuck out of here before I rip your damn throat out." With that threat, she slammed the door shut, leaving me standing on the outside. "Wow," I exclaimed to no one in particular. I couldn't believe she'd been so aggressive and was left shaken by the unpleasant encounter. Fearing I'd made a mistake, I double-checked the door number. Number 23. This was definitely my room. Clearly, there'd been a mistake by the management, and so I resolved to go to the front desk to figure things out. I could tell something was off as soon as I walked into the small reception area of the motel. The space was very similar to how I remembered, but also subtly different. There was a dark and foreboding atmosphere inside, whereas it had previously been friendly and welcoming. I couldn't quite put my finger on why. The only visible difference I could see was an odd and disturbing shrine set upon a table in the corner of the room. A collection of photographs and trinkets underneath a Grim Reaper statue. A ceramic model of a robed skeleton holding a scythe. It reminded me of Santa Muerte, the patron of the infamous Mexican death cult. I was sure this shrine hadn't been there before, and it seemed an odd addition to what I thought was a family-friendly motel. Nevertheless, I proceeded to the front desk and rang the bell to get somebody's attention. After a moment's wait, an elderly man emerged from the back office to answer my call. I was somewhat relieved to discover that I recognized the old-timer. He was in fact the motel's owner who had checked me in 2 weeks earlier. But when I got a closer look at the man, I realized something was a bit off with him. The owner I remembered was friendly and helpful, but this man appeared sullen and hostile, glaring at me with contempt in his eyes and spitting when he spoke. "What do you want?" he demanded. I could hardly believe how rude he was being and struggled to find the words to respond. "I'm a guest here, remember? Room 23. But someone else is in there." "You're not a guest here," he shot back without hesitation. I was getting angry now, and so raised my voice in frustration. "Excuse me, sir, but you're wrong. You checked me in yourself." "Like hell I did. You think I'm stupid?" he shouted. "I would never rent a room to your kind." Wow, I thought. Your kind? What the hell was this guy's problem? "Listen, sir, you have no right to speak to me like this." I instantly regretted my outburst when I saw the sudden change in the old man's demeanor as his eyes screwed up in rage and he reached under the counter. To my horror, the motel owner pulled out a shotgun, pointing it directly in my face. "Get the fuck out of my business, you damn parasite," he yelled in fury. "Get out, or I'll blow your fucking head off." I raised my hands defensively, shaking almost uncontrollably as I slowly backed up. Somehow, I reached the door, slowly and carefully opening it while the owner tracked me with his gun. Once I was out, I ran for my life, not stopping until I was clear of the office. I breathed heavily as I hid behind a bush, trying to regain my composure and make some sense of what had just happened. Why the hell had the old man reacted like that? I didn't know, but was determined not to stick around in case he got trigger happy. My plan was to drive back to the facility and report what had occurred here. But big surprise, I couldn't find my car. It wasn't in the space where I'd left it, or anywhere else in the vicinity. By this point, I thought I was losing my fucking mind. None of it made sense. Was I having a mental breakdown, or was I the victim of an elaborate scam? There seemed to be only one option left to me, and that was to go to the cops. Alright, listen all. I need to move, so I'll finish the rest of this tomorrow. Until then, be safe.